So welcome everybody to the Bring Your Own Lunch program for summer 2024. These will be held during June, July, and August, as usual. So today's the inaugural presentation for the 2024 summer season now. My name is Rich Padover. Many of you know me. I'm the summer interpreter here, or tour guide. And this is a program that I began in 2019 and that we are continuing with today now, 5 years later. So we hope to keep this program going, keep it going as long as possible, 5 years so far. And so this, along with my walking tours and my museum tours and my boat tours, form the core of our programs here, the summer programs at Lawrence Heritage. So today we will be, the topic that I selected for my presentation today is the Underground Railroad, okay, which does have a local connection. So what I did, as you can see there, is I put together a handout that'll form today's presentation. So I gave you a little something to read there by way of introduction, okay? And then those of you who've been to my presentations before, you know how I do it, right? There's a quiz, a multiple choice quiz, and then give it your best shot. It's ungraded, okay? I will not ask you what the score, okay? And then we'll go over the correct answers together. That forms the discussion, and then we'll have a little Q&A. Probably get done around 1 o'clock or so. Okay, if you're still taking the quiz, that's fine. We'll get started now, and then you can just fill in the rest as we go along. So, by the way, I did go downstairs and bring up the flyers for the summer programs here. There are some downstairs in the trunks in the lobby, but I brought some up here if you want to grab one from here when you're leaving after today. But the green flyer has all my walking tours listed here. If you're interested in doing one of my walking tours of the downtown area, there's different thematic walking tours, okay? And then the blue flyer lists my summer boat tours of the Merrimack River, okay? This you do have to make a reservation for. If you think, these are on Saturday mornings starting July 13th, so feel free to grab one of these if you'd like. Then the pink flyer is the old-fashioned 4th of July celebration, which I know some of you have been to here over the years. We're doing it again, of course, this year. This has the basic information on it. And then the yellow flyer is the Bring Your Own Lunch schedule for the month of June now, okay? So I'll be presenting next week as well on the Lawrence family, for whom the city is named after. And then June 19th, the supervisor, Matt, that some of you have met at the front desk downstairs, he'll be talking about the Peace Corps. He was in it, so he has his own personal experiences to share from the Peace Corps. And then on June 26th, Amita Kiley, some of you know her from the History Center on Essex Street. She'll be doing a presentation on the History Center, the archives, okay? And then once I develop the July schedule, it'll get sent out. Those of you who are friends of the park will get the email blast. And then in August, once I have the August schedule, sometime in July, then that'll get sent out to the friends through email as well, okay? But as you know, at any time, you can just come in and pick up a flyer if you like the hard copy as well, okay? So, all right, so let's see how we did here now. All right, so I gave you the basic information, the synopsis there about the Underground Railroad, right? You know, of course, as we know, it was not literal, right? There was no train running underground, right? Okay, like the subway in Boston, okay? It's a figurative term for how escaped slaves, right, okay, were transported, right, okay, trying to seek their freedom, but of course underground, right, okay, because they were doing this illegally, so they did not want to be seen, right, okay, so hence the Underground Railroad, right, the escaped slaves being moved but out of sight, all right? So think of kind of like a subway system, okay? So, and again, I gave you some basic information there just to help kind of paint the picture for you leading up to the quiz here, okay? And then the terminology. The Underground Railroad does have its specific terminology, okay? So what was a pilot? What was a conductor, right? The passengers, the stations, all right? Now, of course, we all know what those mean in everyday usage, okay? But again, it was a particular vocabulary that also applied to the Underground Railroad. Okay? And then I mentioned about the Fugitive Slave Act, as you can see there. That, of course, had a big effect on the escaped slaves and their plight. Okay? So, now, let's test your knowledge. All right, number one. Escaped slaves went in which one of the following directions? Okay, now, would anybody like to share their answer for number one? You don't have to, but if anybody wants to talk.
All of the above?
Yes, very good. All of the above. Okay. So, all right. So the correct answer to number one is D. All of the above. Okay. So a lot of them headed to Canada. Some of them headed to Mexico. Some of them also headed to various islands in the Caribbean. Okay, which may not have been free at first, okay, from slavery, but eventually slavery was abolished in some of those Caribbean islands, which we will get to that as well in another upcoming question, okay? So, but all of the above, all right? And also, just so you know, some of the escaped slaves, besides the choices I gave you for number one here, they also went to Spanish Florida, Native American territory, the West, okay, and Europe as well, okay? So basically, they went everywhere in all directions when they were trying to escape slavery, okay? So, all right, number two, true or false? There was slavery in all 13 original colonies. True. Yes, true.
We said true.
Yes, good. All right. Some of you 2 for 2 so far, I hope. Okay. All right, good. All right. So, yes, you know, oftentimes we associate slavery with the South, right? Okay, and while that was true, okay, we also have to keep in mind that the slaves, you could also find slaves up here in the North as well, okay? Now, of course, we did not have plantations up here in the North, all right? But we did have slaves, not a lot, but there were some here, okay? So whatever slaves we had up here in the North would have been household servants, basically, okay? Like maids, butlers, cooks, gardeners, things like that for wealthy people who were living up here in the North, okay? But slavery did exist in each of the 13 original colonies, all right? Even though, again, it is identified mostly with the South, okay? But we had slaves up here in the North as well, okay? So. All right, number 3. The maritime industry offered employment and transportation, thus the Pacific West Coast became a destination because of the whaling industry. Military service was an additional option for escaped slaves, and thousands of African Americans joined from the colonial era up to the Civil War in order to try to gain their freedom. What was the well-known regiment from Massachusetts that consisted of many freed and escaped slaves during the Civil War? Anybody want to share
54th.
The 54th, right, very good. The 54th Mass Regiment, okay? And what I'll do is I will pass around a photo showing the Massachusetts 54th Regiment during the thrust of the Civil War, okay? A movie was made, I think, around 1990 or so. Was it Matthew Broderick, I think, maybe, right, okay, dealing with this, okay? But Tom, I'll start with you. If we can pass this around just to show you the illustration there of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, okay? All right, number 4. What was the main reason why African Americans fled slavery in the South? Anybody want to share their answer?
D. All of the above.
D. All of the above. Yeah. Okay. So all of the above. All right. So brutal physical punishment, psychological abuse, endless hours of hard labor without compensation. Okay. All of these drove many slaves to risk their lives in order to escape plantation life. Okay, so you can probably visualize there, right? You know, use your imagination, right? Okay, so all of those apply to the slaves and drove them to try to escape. Okay, so. All right, any questions, comments, by the way, so far? Otherwise, I'll just move along here. Okay, number 5. In the North, which one of the following provided some of the most organized support for the Underground Railroad? Like above, this particular group of people above most or all other groups of people really provided good, solid support for the escaped slaves. The Quakers, right, Quakers, okay, A, all right, so. So, yes, so the Quakers were actually the first religious movement to condemn slavery, okay? And they did not allow their members to own slaves, all right? So they took their abolitionism very seriously, okay? And they went so far as to ask Congress in 1790 if slavery could be abolished, okay? Obviously, the answer was no. Congress did not abolish slavery in 1790, but that did not stop the Quakers from petitioning Congress to see if they might consider abolishing it, okay? And of course, with the Quakers, right, you know, the reason they took abolitionism very seriously is because their primary belief, okay, is that all human beings are equal and worthy of respect, right? That's at the core of their beliefs, okay? Hence their very strong feeling of abolitionism, okay? And therefore are trying to do all that they could in order to assist escaped slaves, all right? So, okay, number 6. For those who escaped and endured a long journey and all of its hardships, what was considered, quote unquote, the promised land? Canada. Yep. C, Canada. Yep. Okay. So, all right. Canada, if I may speak in biblical terms, okay, Canada for an escaped slave was considered the promised land, okay? If they could make it to Canada, they were golden, okay? So, now remember that, you know, at the time, right, Canada, okay, in its early days, was part of the British Empire, okay? And the British Empire abolished slavery in 1833, okay? So, therefore, Canada being part of the British Empire, slavery was abolished there as well, okay, with this decree from Parliament in 1833, okay? So that's why Canada was the promised land, all right? And the Underground Railroad flourished in cities, American cities that were close to the Canadian border, okay? So for example, in Rochester and Buffalo, New York, okay, being near the Canadian border, those had quite the Underground Railroad developed there, okay? Because if you can make it like, if you're an escaped slave, you can make it to Rochester or Buffalo, New York, you are almost there, right? You could practically see Canada from Rochester or Buffalo, right? Okay? So if an escaped slave made it as far north as Rochester or Buffalo, New York, they were almost there, right? Canada was literally within sight, okay? They just needed that final push there, that final leg to get them over the border, right, and into Canada, to the promised land, okay? So, all right, questions or comments? Okay. Number 7, which one of the original 13 colonies was the first to abolish slavery?
Massachusetts.
What's that?
Massachusetts?
No, not Massachusetts. You might think, but no, not Massachusetts. Vermont. Yes, Vermont. Yes, Vermont. Okay. All right. Now you may know that Vermont has long been known for its independence, right? Vermonters do have an independence streak, right? That's one of the things that the state of Vermont is pretty well known for, its independence, okay? So on July 2nd, 1777, okay, Vermont banned slavery outright. No ifs, ands, or buts, okay? We are abolishing slavery, that's it. July 2nd, 1777, okay? Becoming the first of the 13 colonies to outright ban slavery, all right? Now, outright is the key word, right, okay? The operative word, because I'll be honest with you, Pennsylvania did tinker with it earlier than that, okay, but it didn't really make any difference. It didn't really go anywhere, okay? They were just tinkering around the edges, banning slavery, okay, see what I'm saying? But Vermont became the first of the 13 colonies to outright ban it. Again, no ifs, ands, or buts, okay? So, and of course, this was in response to the calls from abolitionists to end slavery. Okay, and Vermont listened, and the state legislature said, okay, yes, we will ban slavery, okay? And I also want to let you know, at the same time they were banning slavery in Vermont, okay, concurrently, they also provided full voting rights for African American males, okay? So, wow, they're really going full tilt here with this, right? Okay, we're banning slavery, and we're actually going to let African American males vote. Okay, so progressive Vermont, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you know, right? And of course, who's one of their U.S. senators today? Right, Bernie Sanders, who's an independent, right? Okay, he had to register as a Democrat when he ran for president in 2016 and 2020, but after each of those presidential campaigns, when he had to quit, then he reverted back to his independent status. Okay, so, yeah. All right, questions or comments? No? Okay, number 8. Women became active in reform movements like anti-slavery, temperance, or, you know, not drinking alcohol, and suffrage, the right to vote, all right? And by the way, you have to remember, because in the 1800s, because women, you know, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that, right? They were not allowed to do this and that, all right? What they did, because they had all this free time now, right? Because they weren't allowed to do these other things, right? So they had this time, and they're like, okay, fine. Then, you know, we're going to get involved in like social movements, okay? So, yeah, we're going to like see what we can do to help slaves, okay, to eradicate slavery. We're going to see what we can do to ban the consumption of alcohol in this country, okay? And while we're doing those things, we're also going to see if we can give ourselves voting rights, suffrage, okay? So, especially in the mid to late 1800s, okay, women were really getting involved in these various movements in our country, okay? Anti-slavery, the temperance movement, and gaining suffrage, okay? So, now, locally, Andover was a hotbed of abolitionism, with some citizens breaking the law of the land by participating in the Underground Railroad. Which well-known resident of Andover was an example of this? Anybody want to share their answer? What's that?
Stowe.
Yes, very good. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Yeah, B, right. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Okay. Now, Martha Carrier was the woman who was accused of being a witch, right? You may have heard that name in association with Andover, okay? So I threw that in there to throw everybody off, right? Okay, but she's the famous Andover woman who was accused of witchcraft, okay? And then the other two women did live in Andover, but they are not identified with the Underground Railroad, okay? So, now, Harriet Beecher Stowe, I'll just elaborate on her briefly. Does anybody know what exactly brought Harriet Beecher Stowe to Andover? Yeah, Andrea.
Well, yes, because I think there's a house at Phillips Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Phillips Academy.
Yeah, good. Very good. Yeah, very good. Okay. Her husband got a teaching job at Phillips Academy in Andover. Okay. So that's what brought the couple to Andover. Okay. And of course, she's perhaps best known for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? Okay, dealing with the whole issue of slavery. Okay. So now her house, the Stowe house, where Harriet and her husband were living while he was a professor at Phillips Academy, is still there. Okay. If you let's see. All right, if you're on Bartlett Street, where the town hall is, all right, and you make a left out of Andover Town Hall onto Bartlett Street, the Doherty Middle School will be on your left, all right. Keep going up Bartlett Street, all right, and when you get to the end of Bartlett Street, there's a big stone house on your left, okay. It's like on a curve there. That's the old Stowe house there, okay. Phillips now uses it for dormitories. It's had different uses over the years, okay, but the most recent use now is dormitories for the students at Phillips Academy, okay, but that is where Harriet and her husband were living while he was teaching at Phillips, okay, which was like a 10-year period, like 1853 to 1863, give or take. That's when they were in Andover. Okay, so, all right, and as you may know, Harriet Beecher Stowe also, being an abolitionist, okay, she invited other abolitionists to her home in Andover, okay, such as, you might recognize some of these names, William Lloyd Garrison, right, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, okay, all these famous people came to Andover to speak, okay, at the invitation of Harriet Beecher Stowe to talk about why, you know, slavery should be abolished in our country, okay, so, all right, questions or comments? All right, number 9. Also in Andover, Fry Village in particular was a hotbed of anti-slavery activity, okay? Now, today, what do we call what was known as Fry Village? Shawsheen Square, right, okay? Shawsheen Square, okay? So if you're at, 28 and 133, right, in Andover, okay? There's Bill DeLuca's car dealership there, right, okay? At one of the, what's that?
Wood Estate.
The Wood Estate is on another corner, right, okay? That used to be called Fry Village, okay? Named after one of the early settlers in Andover, okay? But then at whatever point it was in time, it got renamed to Shawsheen Village. Well, actually, William Wood, okay, in the early 1920s when he built his own little community within a community there, right? It became Shawsheen Village, okay? And today now we know it as basically Shawsheen Square, that busy intersection there, okay? So now I'll just elaborate on that briefly. So in Fry Village, okay, what we know as Shawsheen Square today, and again, that was a hotbed of anti-slavery activity, okay? So we had 3 men there who ran businesses, okay, who were very much into the anti-slavery movement. So William Poor, you know where Poor Street is now off of Shawsheen Square, right, okay? William Poor had a wagon factory there, all right? He made horse-drawn wagons, okay? And he was, again, very much into anti-slavery. So does anybody know what he did? What was his, now again, he had a wagon factory, right? And what was his role that he took upon himself in assisting escaped slaves? Right, okay. When he was building his wagons on Poor Street, okay, and this was discovered, at some point afterward, okay, but when he built his wagons, he built them with hidden compartments underneath. All right, think of roughly the trunk in your automobile, okay, right? So when the escaped slaves would come make it up to Andover, okay, and William Poor would swing into action, oh yes, happy to help, all right, he would hide them in those secret compartments under his wagons, okay, and then now they'd be able to continue heading north, right? Again, the promised land, eventually hoping to make it up into Canada, okay?
So, was he a conductor?
No, his role was very short-term. I guess kind of a conductor, but just like in Andover though, all right? So he would build the wagons, make the secret compartments, get them into those compartments, and then move them on to the next. So I guess in a way, Paul, you could say, yeah, he was kind of a conductor, if we use the terminology there, yeah, okay? But some conductors stayed with the slaves on longer parts of their journey. He took care of them while they were in Andover and then helped move them along, to the next conductor and so forth, yeah. Okay, but yeah, good question, yeah.
So what happened to him when he was found out?
Back then, basically you would get blacklisted, you might have to pay a fine, okay. He didn't go to jail, okay. But when he was doing this, though, this generally would have been before the Fugitive Slave Act became law in 1850. All right, so that didn't apply to him because he was before that. Okay, but basically, yeah, if it was revealed that you were helping the escaped slaves and you would be blacklisted, let's say, you might have to pay a fine. But on the other hand, you have to consider, though, up here in New England, right, we were mostly anti-slavery, okay? So a lot of people were on the same page. Not everybody, right, okay? But, so if you were assisting escaped slaves up here, you and a lot of people like you thought alike, okay? So you may not actually have gotten punished, okay, because the local officials would have been anti-slavery for that matter, right? So they might have actually been encouraging you, right? Not even like punishing you, but encouraging you, right? You know, so that's, you know, that was the situation. And also in Fry Village, Elijah Hussey had a sawmill there. On Poor Street now, we have Hussey's Pond. If you ever drive up Poor Street, if you're leaving Shawshene Square, on the left is Hussey's Pond. So Elijah Hussey had a sawmill there, okay? He was big into the anti-slavery movement. And William Donald had an ink factory in Fry Village, okay? So William Poor, Elijah Hussey, William Donald, all were like, you know, in unison now, helping escape slaves who made it into Andover, okay? And one other thing about Andover, and then we'll look at Lawrence here, question number 10. Another early settler of Andover, his name was William Jenkins, okay? There's Jenkins Road now named after him, okay? I think in the part of town that's towards Middleton, you get towards Middleton going in that direction, okay? But William Jenkins was another famous early local, you know, settler in Andover. And he aided fugitive slaves as well, okay? And he supported total emancipation of slaves, okay? If you were to look for like the poster boy, okay, for who wants immediate and total emancipation of slaves, it would have been Mr. Jenkins in Andover, okay? Now, his house was at what is today 8 Douglas Lane in Andover, okay? It's not his original house there, but the house that now stands at 8 Douglas Lane in Andover. It's somewhere out in the sticks. That was the Jenkins home, okay? And what he did in the 1840s, he made structural changes to his house, okay, in order to make it part of the Underground Railroad. Okay, so for example, when he made these structural changes to his house, he created, you know, like secret panels, okay, and spaces in between floorboards where the slaves could hide, okay? So, and he had anti-slavery meetings in his home as well, okay? So, anti-slavery meetings were held there. He made structural changes in order to accommodate slaves on their route, trying to make it up to Canada, okay? So, again, he was all in for the anti-slavery movement, okay?
Did he ever own land which is now part of Carroll State Park?
Yes, thank you, Andrea, right.
Because I saw that on TV last week, like, that name rings a bell.
Yes, there we go, right. Harold Parker State Forest, which is part of DCR, right, that runs Lawrence Heritage here. Yes, so Jenkins Road there, right, Harold Parker State Forest, that's the area, yeah. Okay, so. All right, any other questions or comments right now? All right, Tom, yeah.
If there wasn't much local enforcement of against activists who were sneaking slaves through the Underground Railroad, why would there be so much secrecy? In other words, it couldn't have been done openly with impunity?
Okay, good question. All right, wherever there was anti-slavery activity, okay, by the same token, there was also like a pro-slavery crowd, okay? Even though, you know, up here in the north, we were anti-slavery, again, it wasn't everybody, okay? There were some people up here who were pro-slavery, even though they were living in the north. Just their values, they could have been transplants from the south, they could have been wealthy and they wanted, you know, slaves as household servants, okay? So you always, even though if you were anti-slavery here in the north, you were in the majority, And by the same token, you also had to keep an eye out over your shoulder, okay? Because there was the pro-slavery crowd here. And, you know, and they could do things to you, okay? If you know, made it really known. Oh, look at me, I'm anti-slavery, and my house is a stop on the Underground Railroad, okay? You know, you might find your house burned down that night after, you know what I mean, okay? So you had to be careful. Even though you were in the majority here if you were anti-slavery, the pro-slavery crowd could get nasty and could really physically harm you or your property if you really, you know, advertised it too much, okay? So, you know, all right. Okay, number 10. Now, let's talk about Lawrence here for a moment. In Lawrence, a house that was once located on the southwest corner of South Broadway and Andover Street is believed to have been a stop. Believed. We don't have solid evidence, okay? But it's believed to have been a stop on the Underground Railroad. And this house belonged to a former mayor and a founding father of Lawrence, who lived in this particular house from 1847 until his death in 1872. So, do we know... Saunders, very good. Daniel Saunders. Okay. So, now, the house that Daniel Saunders lived in, okay, unfortunately was torn down in 1949. Okay. Just, you know, it was like 100 years old, over 100 years old. It had fallen into disrepair. It should have been preserved for its historic value. Unfortunately, it wasn't, okay? So in 1949, the Saunders house came down, okay? And another house was built there, okay? A non-Saunders family was living in it. And then that was torn down, okay? And then in 1986, what you see there now was constructed, right? The Metro Credit Union, okay? On the southwest corner of Andover Street and South Broadway, okay? Now, there is a plaque there, however. Has anybody seen the plaque there? Tom, okay, you've seen it, right? So that time when Dan Rivera was the mayor, okay, and one of the things he wanted to do when he was mayor is call attention, bring attention back to some of Lawrence's forgotten history, okay? And one of the things he decided to do is, even though the Saunders house was gone, and there's the credit union there now, but he's like, well, let's recognize the site though. You know, this is a historic site, even though the Saunders house is gone, right, okay? But the land itself, right, because it was the home, it contained the house of Mayor Saunders, let's recognize it, okay? So when Dan Rivera was the mayor, that's when the plaque was put in there, alluding to the Saunders home, making reference to the Saunders home. Now, again, we don't know for sure, okay, but we believe, local historians, we believe that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. It was documented in the early 1900s, okay, but still, you know, the door is still a little open, though, all right? We have to believe what was said about it. You know, we're relying on oral history, okay? And the person I'm referring to is Robert Tewksbury, by the way, okay? In like 1914, a historian, Robert Tewksbury here in Lawrence, talked about, okay, I think he spoke to a newspaper reporter, how, yeah, you know, I was told, okay, from by a Saunders relative, that, this, you know, my relative's house here was a stop on the Underground Railroad, okay? But again, you know, that's still kind of leaving the door open a little, right, okay? So we'd like to believe it's true. It would add historic value to the Saunders home, not just, oh, a mayor lived here, but this was a stop on the Underground Railroad, okay? So again, that's why we have to keep the door just a little open as to whether or not it's completely true or not, okay? But we'll say, for the most part, personally, I think it's true, okay? You know, so, all right. Now, other houses in Lawrence were, again, believed, okay, because this wasn't actually like outright recorded on paper, okay? So other houses in Lawrence were believed to be stops on the Underground Railroad. So, for example, I don't know the number, but there was a house on Prospect Hill on High Street, okay? You know, where Storrow Park is located, the blue and white water tank, the Geisler swimming pool, okay? So there was a house, and again, I don't know the number. I haven't been able to uncover the specific address on High Street in my research, but among other houses in Lawrence, there was a house on High Street that was believed to be part of the Underground Railroad, okay? So, all right, and then I gave you recommended reading there, okay? So if any of you are really interested in this topic and you'd like to do some further reading, research perhaps, Mr. Seibert there, I gave you the name of the book he wrote and where you can purchase it if you're interested, okay? And I'm just checking my notes here if there was anything else I wanted to tell you. Yeah, so as far as the Caribbean islands, okay, some people might say, oh, why were the slaves, on question number one there, I think it was, why were some of the slaves, escaped slaves, heading to the Caribbean islands? Because didn't they have slavery there, right? If you're escaping slavery, why would you want to walk right back into it, right? Okay, but again, over time, a lot of those Caribbean islands did abolish slavery, okay? See, because, here's the thing, it was Britain, Great Britain, and France that controlled a lot of those islands in the Caribbean. They were colonies of the two countries, Great Britain and France, okay? So, as I mentioned earlier, Britain abolished slavery in 1833, okay? And that included its territories and its colonies, okay? So that's why Canada now, right? It's abolished in Canada. That's why it's abolished in some of those Caribbean islands now. At the same time, they were under British control, okay? Then in 1848, France outlawed slavery, okay? And that included in its colonies as well, okay? So the British colonies in the Caribbean were declared slave-free in 1833. Then in 1848, the French colonies in the Caribbean were declared slave-free, all right? So between those two countries, that accounted for a lot of those Caribbean islands, okay? So if you're an escaped slave now, and you headed to the Caribbean, that's why, okay? And I'll give you a few more examples here. So Mexico, okay, a part of Latin America, declared or abolished slavery in 1829. So I told you some of them headed to Mexico, that's why, all right? As of 1829, Mexico had abolished slavery, okay? Puerto Rico, 1873, they abolished slavery, okay? And Cuba abolished it in 1886. Okay? So again, like when I was telling my wife Lori about this, you know, when I was making up the quiz and she was looking at it, she's like, what do you mean they headed to the Caribbean? And weren't they like leaving slavery and then just heading right back into it, you know? And I'm like, well, no, the research shows, you know, okay, what I was just telling you X, Y, and Z now. So over time, okay, and again, between the British and the French abolishing slavery, and it applied to their colonies in the Caribbean as well, not just the mother country, the homeland, okay? So that's why some of those escaped slaves headed to some of those Caribbean islands once they knew that slavery had been abolished there, and it would be, you know, like, I guess what we would call a safe haven nowadays for them, okay? So what I'll do, I'll take any questions, but first of all, let me just, a couple more handouts there. I'll do one in each direction. So Tom, over here, there's 3 photos there to my left that show slavery, like the life of a slave on the plantation, okay, and then hiding, and then escaping, okay, you'll see the graphics there. And then I have a map showing the routes of the Underground Railroad, okay, and you can see, you know, emanating from the south and then going in all different directions, okay. So we'll get this started to my right here, all right. So, all right, so yeah, does anybody, yeah, we got done a little early, but that's okay. Yeah, Tom.
I Googled the address of 8 Douglas Lane, and it mentions, you know, it was built in 1765.
Okay.
And it has a lot of extra space, I guess, because, you know, but my question is, do you know, is that house on the Historical Society preservation?
Oh, I honestly don't know.
I hope it is.
It should be, you would think, right.
Considering the history of it.
Considering its history, right. Yeah, Lori and I do belong to the Andover Center for History and Culture, so I'll have to check on that.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I volunteered with police and the archives at Florence Library.
Oh, okay.
And there are scrapbooks from the 1850s.
Okay.
And it refers to the abolitionist movement in the city, occasionally, and which surprised me. I didn't know. And there was one incident that was interesting. A couple from Louisiana were visiting the city, and they had an enslaved woman with them as their personal servant. And so the people in Lawrence who were involved in the abolitionist movement said, we are an anti-slavery state. You can't be a slave in our state. And they wanted her to leave. They were trying to tell her she could leave this couple because she was in Massachusetts. But she had a husband. So she did not want to leave. She wanted to go back to her home and to her husband. And so there was a follow-up later that she and her husband were now in a non-slave state. I'm thinking Cincinnati, Ohio, or something like that. We were together in a non-slave. Yes.
Okay. I'll just comment on that. You brought up something interesting. If any of you remember your U.S. History 1 from high school or college, there was something called the Dred Scott decision. Okay, might ring a bell, maybe? Okay. All right. The Dred Scott decision, 1858, one of the landmark, a landmark case from the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, basically what happened was Dred Scott was an enslaved African American in the South. Okay, his master moved out of the South. Okay, brought his slaves with him, including this Dred Scott, okay, and went to the upper Midwest, okay, Wisconsin, okay, and then Illinois, okay. So now Dred Scott, all right, his feeling was that, oh, okay, I am now in free territory, right, the Wisconsin territory, and then the state of Illinois, okay. So Dred Scott sued for his freedom because he felt that if my master is bringing me to a free state, a non-slave state, then I should be set free now, okay? So he went through the lower courts, they denied his request, okay? And his case made it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, okay? So he sued for his freedom at the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, he got denied there as well, okay? So Chief Justice Roger Taney, T-A-N-E-Y, in the decision that came out, okay, basically the Supreme Court said that because blacks, okay, were not considered U.S. citizens at the time in the late 1850s, okay, they had no right to sue in court for anything, for their freedom or for anything else, okay? So But that is considered, one of the landmark Supreme Court cases in our country, the Dred Scott decision, when he thought he had it out there, okay, because he was taken to free territory. Why shouldn't I be set free then, okay? But the Supreme Court said no. At the time, blacks were not yet considered U.S. citizens, therefore they had no right to sue in federal court, all right? So your slave status remains. Basically, is what the Supreme Court told him, So that's, when you told me what you had said, that's what reminded me of the Dred Scott decision, So, yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments? No? Okay, so again, help yourself to any flyers, refreshments. Next Wednesday, I'll talk about the Lawrence family. Okay, so we'll learn a lot more about the Lawrence family next week, and then again, Matt from downstairs will be talking about the Peace Corps the week after that, and then the week after that, Anita Kiley from the History Center will give a presentation on the History Center and talk all about its archives. Okay, and I'm still working on the July schedule right now, but I'll share that with you once I get that all filled in. Okay, welcome, and thank you everybody for coming and your participation today.